Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Vital Descent. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarland. This is episode 274, and the show notes may be found at vitaldescent.com/274. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the International Criminal Court and the revelations by The Guardian that basically Israel has worked for at least 9 years to undermine the International Criminal Court in efforts to suppress any type of prosecution for war crimes of its leaders, including Benjamin Netanyahu. So, first, as a roadmap, we're going to be talking about the International Criminal Court and exactly what it is, where it gets its power from. Then we're going to dive into the headlines. But first, here's just a little teaser, kind of not to bury the lead here. Here's an article from El Mayadeen English from last month entitled ICC Must Be Allowed to Work, quote, Without Intimidation, say 93 members. We're going to go through some other headlines as well, but just it says the International Criminal Court must be allowed to conduct its work without intimidation, stressed a joint statement issued late Friday by 93 states aimed at reinforcing support for the judicial body, reports The Guardian. The large group of ICC member states pledged to defend the institution and, quote, preserve its integrity from any political interference and pressure against the court, its officials, and those cooperating with it. So I just want to remind everyone that Vital Descent is featured at the Libertarian Institute. I am the Justin Raimondo Fellow over there at the Institute, and we are doing a fundraiser, our summer fundraiser right now, and we're giving you guys the opportunity to help join us in the cause, fighting for liberty and spreading the ideas of liberty, freedom, and prosperity. Head on over to libertarianinstitute.org/donate. Go on over. You can get awesome bonuses for joining us in our fight, including signed copies of Scott Horton's books, and some of our books that we publish as well that you can pick for yourself. Head on over there. If you really want to increase your impact, become a recurring donor. Again, libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And also right now I'm live streaming this on YouTube and Twitter. I'm trying something new. So if you are watching this, feel free to pop in the chat and I will be responding to messages that you guys send me and maybe questions or something like that. But just know if you're listening to the podcast version that if this goes well, it might be something that I do more regularly, live stream the recording of these episodes on YouTube. So if you go to icc-cpi.int/about/the-court, here's the page where the court explains itself in its own words. The International Criminal Court investigates and, where warranted, tries individuals charged with the gravest crimes of concern to the international community: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. That should be our language, right, as libertarians? This cause is the cause of all humanity, says former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. It says the court is participating in a global fight to end impunity, and through international criminal justice, the court aims to hold those responsible accountable for their crimes and to help prevent these crimes from happening again. The court cannot reach these goals alone. As a court of last resort, it seeks to complement and not replace national courts. Governed by an international treaty called the Rome Statute, the ICC is the world's first permanent international criminal court. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that one thing to keep in mind is that the ICC is where individuals are charged, and the ICJ is where states are charged. So those are two really important differences to note, because you heard about essentially everything that was happening in the ICJ about the genocide accusations against Israel and everything that has to do with that. It's like these are two different things, and you just got to keep that in mind when you're looking at it. So how the court works, the crimes. The court's founding treaty called the Rome Statute, grants the ICC jurisdiction over four main crimes. First, the crime of genocide is characterized by the specific intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group by killing its members or by other means, causing serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group. So we've covered this on the show a whole lot. So that's the first crime. Second, the ICC can prosecute crimes against humanity, which are serious violations committed as part of a large-scale attack against any civilian population. So there's a whole bunch of different detailed crimes in the Rome Statute. Third, war crimes, which are grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions in the context of armed conflict, and include, for instance, the use of child soldiers, the killing or torture of persons such as civilians or prisoners of war, intentionally directing attacks against hospitals, ding, 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 historical monuments, or buildings dedicated to religion, education, arts, science, or charitable purposes. I think that in our coverage, and if you've been watching, Kyle Ancelone, Conflicts of Interest, or Dave DeCamp at Anti-War News, you'll hear all about how Israel is blowing up hospitals, universities, art, science, education centers in Gaza, and that should be illegal, right? It is. So finally, the fourth crime falling within the ICC's jurisdiction is the crime of aggression. It is the use of armed force by a state against the sovereignty, integrity, or independence of another state. The definition of this crime was adopted through amending the Rome Statute at the first review conference of the statute in Kampala, Uganda in 2010. So, legal process. As an international court, the ICC's legal process may function differently from that in your national jurisdiction. Below are a few highlights giving key information on the legal process. Oh boy, okay, so jurisdiction. The court may exercise jurisdiction in a situation where genocide, all those crimes we talked about, were committed on or after July 1st, 2002, and the crimes were committed by a state party national or in the territory of a state party, or in a state that has accepted the jurisdiction of the court, or the crimes were referred to the ICC prosecutor by the UN Security Council pursuant to a resolution adopted under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. So, interesting. Cooperation. As a judicial institution, the ICC does not have its own police force or enforcement body, thus it relies on cooperation with countries worldwide for support, particularly for making arrests, transferring arrested persons to the ICC detention center in The Hague, freezing suspects' assets, and enforcing sentences. While not a UN organization, the court has a cooperation agreement with the UN. When a situation is not within the court's jurisdiction, the UN Security Council can refer the situation to the ICC, granting it jurisdiction. This has been done in the situations in Darfur, Sudan, and Libya. The ICC actively works to build understanding and cooperation in all regions. For example, through seminars and conferences worldwide, the court cooperates with both states, parties, and non-states parties. The UN works in particularly close cooperation with its host state, the Netherlands, regarding practical matters such as constructing the court's new permanent buildings, transferring suspects to the ICC detention center, facilitating their appearances before the court, and many other matters. Okay, so let's go forward then to this one here, an article written by Ted Snyder on antiwar.com, America's Ugly History with the International Criminal Court. He writes, May 31st of this year, on May 20th, the chief prosecutor of the ICC announced that he was seeking arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as for Hamas leaders Yahya Sinwar, Ismail Haniyeh, and Mohammed Diab Ibrahim al-Masri. Officials in Washington lashed out against the court and began preparations to pressure the ICC to back off on pursuing the arrests. Netanyahu and Gallant, the U.S. insisted, should be left alone or left to Israel's courts. The Hamas officials should be held accountable, according to the State Department, but not by the ICC. Interesting. The Israeli government should hold them accountable on the battlefield, and if not a battlefield, then a court of law, State Department spokesman Matt Miller said. Quote, we absolutely believe that Hamas should be held accountable. That could either be through the prosecution of the war effort by Israel. It could be by being killed. It could be by being brought to justice in an Israeli court. Congress is looking to take the lead in punishing the ICC. House Speaker Mike Johnson said, quote, Congress is reviewing all options, including sanctions, to punish the ICC and ensure its leadership faces consequences if they proceed. During a Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was asked if the White House would cooperate on legislation that includes the question of the ICC sticking its nose in the business of countries that have an independent, legitimate democratic judicial system. Blinken responded that he is, quote, committed to doing just that. He added, we want to work with you on a bipartisan basis to find an appropriate response, and that there's no question we have to look at the appropriate steps to take to deal with, again, what is a profoundly wrong-headed decision. Blinken told the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee he would welcome working on bipartisan sanctions against the ICC. However, the White House may be considering other steps to deal with the ICC that do not include sanctions. On May 28th, White House spokesperson John Kirby said that sanctions were, quote, not the right answer to deal with the arrest warrants. It is not that the White House would not punish the ICC, but that sanctions on the ICC are not an effective or appropriate tool to address U.S. concerns. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said, adding that the White House, quote, will work with Congress on other options to address the ICC overreach. Still, the White House remains firmly committed to thwarting the ICC deliberation into issuing an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Quote, let me be clear, Biden said, we reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Washington has centered its argument on the grounds that a democratic nation's legal system should be given priority to act first. Marjorie Cohn, Emerita Professor of Law at Thomas Jefferson School of Law and Dean of the People's Academy of International Law, told me, Ted Snyder, quote, the ICC operates under the principle of complementarity. That means the court will assume jurisdiction over a case only if the home country of the accused is unable or unwilling to hold him legally accountable. The White House also argued that Israel is not a member of the ICC. That was my next question, because remember we went through how the court works from its own website, saying that it was created by the Rome Statute, which is an international treaty. So the White House says the court lacks jurisdiction over Tel Aviv. Additionally, the Biden administration said that because the U.S. is not a member, it should not have to support or follow the court. But the U.S. fully supported the recent ICC arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin over actions taken in Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine are also not members of the ICC. Biden endorsed the arrest warrant for Putin, saying, quote, well, I think it's justified, the U.S. leader said, but the question is, the ICC is not recognized internationally by us either, but I think it makes a very strong point. Blinken urged all member nations of the ICC to comply with Putin's arrest warrant. Asked if European allies should, quote, turn over Putin, Blinken answered, I think anyone who's a party to the court and has obligations should fulfill their obligations. So I don't want to read Ted Snyder's entire article, but I think that he gives a lot of context that's very important to understanding, you know, the hypocrisy that the United States has here, you know, cutting against the ICC, or, you know, their sordid history of undermining the ICC. Here's another short article that helps set the context of this recent revelations by The Guardian. On May 20th of this year, Dave wrote, ICC seeks arrest warrants for Israeli and Hamas leaders. On Monday, the ICC announced it was seeking arrest warrants for senior Israeli and Hamas leaders for war crimes and crimes against humanity related to the October 7th Hamas attack. Karim Khan, the ICC's chief prosecutor, said his office was seeking warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. So he specifically, here's a little more detailed than Ted Snyder's piece. Khan alleged the Israeli leaders were responsible for the following crimes: Starvation of civilians as a method of warfare as a war crime. Willfully causing great suffering or serious bodily injury or health, contrary or cruel treatment as a war crime. Willful killing or murder as a war crime. Intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population as a war crime. Extermination and or murder, including in the context of deaths caused by starvation, as a crime against humanity. Persecution as a crime against humanity. Other inhumane acts as crimes against humanity. So moving forward then, in a little bit earlier, there was on May 6th, so that happened on May 20th, on or about May 20th. Earlier on May 6th, 12 Republican senators sent a letter to Khan, the chief prosecutor of the ICC, threatening him that if he did issue warrants, they would take action against him. So fast forward again to June, May 28th, here's the revelation by The Guardian that came out at the end of May. And then we have another piece from June 16th by El Mayadeen English. But here's El Mayadeen on May 28th. Headline is, ex-Mossad head threatened ICC chief to abandon IOF war crimes probe. The subheading is, 4 sources confirm that ICC's then prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, apologies for pronunciation, notified a few senior ICC officials about Yossi Cohen's attempts to persuade her not to go on with the Palestine case. The article says, the former head of the Israeli Mossad, Yossi Cohen, reportedly threatened the former chief prosecutor of the ICC, Fatou Bensouda, during secret meetings to pressure her into abandoning the investigation into Israel for war crimes in Palestine. So again, this is the former head of the Mossad threatening the former female prosecutor, chief prosecutor of the ICC, not to continue investigating Israel for war crimes in Palestine. According to The Guardian, an Israeli source briefed on the operation against Bensouda claimed that the Mossad meant to compromise Bensouda or enlist her as someone who would work with, quote, Israel's demands. While another source said Cohen was serving as Netanyahu's, quote, unofficial messenger. 4 sources confirmed that Bensouda, I'll just say Soda, notified a few senior ICC officials about Cohen's attempts to persuade her, while 3 of them said she told them Cohen pressured her multiple times to not go on with the Palestine case. Accounts shared with ICC officials say that he is reported to have told her, quote, you should help us and let us take care of you. You don't want to be getting into things that could compromise your security or that of your family. One individual said Cohen applied, quote, despicable tactics against her as his behavior was likened to stalking. The Mossad even obtained transcripts of secret recordings and photos of her husband, according to the 2 sources who continued to say that he tried to blackmail and discredit her. These revelations are part of an investigation by The Guardian, the publication Plus 972 magazine, and the Hebrew outlet Local Call into how Israeli intelligence agencies ran a covert war against the ICC for almost 10 years. A spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister's office, contacted by The Guardian, said, quote, the questions forwarded to us are replete with many false and unfounded allegations meant to hurt the state of Israel. So that's Israel's side of the story. This comes amid efforts by current ICC prosecutor Karim Khan to prosecute attempts to impede, intimidate, or improperly influence ICC officials. Legal experts and former ICC officials say that efforts by Cohen to pressure Bensouda could amount to offenses against the administration of justice under Article 70 of the Rome Statute. A spokesperson for the ICC said Khan's office was subject to, quote, several forms of threats and communications that could be viewed as attempts to unduly influence its activities. Here's a subheading, it's a trap. Star Wars, if you guys, I don't know, aren't familiar. Bensouda, after launching the preliminary examination of the case of war crimes in Palestine in 2015, started getting warnings that Israeli intelligence was taking a keen interest in the case. A source recalled that even though the Mossad, quote, didn't leave its signature, it was assumed that the agency was behind some of the activity officials were aware of. Cohen is known in Israel's intelligence community as a recruiter of foreign agents and loyal to the occupation's prime minister after being appointed as director of the Mossad by Netanyahu in 2016 after working as his advisor. Cohen's first contact with Bensouda seemingly took place at the Munich Security Conference in 2017, and then Cohen, quote, ambushed her in a Manhattan hotel suite, according to multiple sources. Bensouda then, in 2018, was on an official visit to New York to meet Joseph Kabila, the former president of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, at his hotel. However, the meeting turned out to be a setup. Bensouda's staff were asked to leave the room, after which Cohen came in, according to three sources familiar with the meeting, which caused concern to Bensouda and a group of ICC officials accompanying her. Why Kabila aided Cohen is not yet known, but ties between them were uncovered in 2022 by the Israeli publication The Marker, which shows that secretive trips the Mossad director made to the DRC go back to 2019. The Marker stated that Cohen's trips meant to seek Kabila's advice, quote, on an issue of interest to Israel were highly unusual. In 22, Israeli broadcaster Kan 11 said his trips were indicating an, quote, extremely controversial plan, and cited official sources who called it, quote, one of Israel's most sensitive secrets. After the surprise meeting, Cohen repeatedly called Bensouda to try and meet with her. According to two people, Bensouda asked Cohen at one point how he obtained her number, to which he replied, "Did you forget what I do for a living?" Cohen, with time, began using threats and manipulation, and a source knowledgeable with Bensouda's accounts of the last two meetings said Cohen asked about her security and that of her family in a manner that made her believe he was threatening her. Between 2019 and 2022, the Mossad had been actively seeking compromising information on the prosecutor and took an interest in her family members. Three sources briefed on the information shared by, quote, Israel, called it an unsuccessful smear campaign against Bensouda. They went after Fatou, one source said, but it had, quote, no impact on the prosecutor's work. Between 2019 and 2020, the Trump administration imposed visa restrictions and sanctions on the ICC prosecutor after a separate pursuit by Bensouda to prosecute for war crimes committed in Afghanistan. That's when Mike Pompeo, then U.S. Secretary of State, accused Bensouda without evidence of having, quote, engaged in corrupt acts for her personal benefit. In the end, quote, this is a quote, in the end, our central concern must be for the victims of crimes, both Palestinian and Israeli, arising from the long cycle of violence and insecurity that has caused deep suffering and despair on all sides, she said in February 21. Bensouda completed her 9-year term 3 months later and was later succeeded by Khan. The fact that they chose the head of the Mossad to be the prime minister's unofficial messenger to Bensouda was to intimidate. By definition, said a source, it failed. This all comes as last week Khan announced the filing of requests for arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, as well as 3 Palestinian resistance leaders. The move triggered a wave of condemnation from U.S. officials, especially Senator Lindsey Graham, surprise there, no surprise, who said he would lead the efforts to impose sanctions on the ICC if it issues the arrest warrants. So, again, just a reminder that I am live streaming on YouTube and Twitter right now. If you are watching, feel free to pop in the chat and say hi, and I'll, address any comments on air, and it'll be in the episode here. So here's one from the 22nd of May. ICC arrest warrants put international law to test, says the Washington Post. So it says the international criminal, so I think this is all these articles will be in the show notes page, vitaldescent.com/274. This is the 28th of May. So this is the week before the last article that I just read. So it did decide, the ICC did decide to file for arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. It's a landmark decision for the court that has usually issued warrants for non-Western leaders and rarely for those backed by the West. So here's a more recent article. The ICC must be allowed to work, quote, without intimidation, says 93 members. I read this at the very beginning of the episode. And again, so the large group of ICC member states, so these are all signatories to the Rome Statute, pledged to defend the institution and preserve its integrity. Their pledge comes after revelations by The Guardian that we just read, exposing efforts by Israel and its spy agencies to undermine, influence, and intimidate the ICC as part of a 9-year campaign of surveillance and espionage. The statement also comes following recent warnings from the ICC's chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, who confirmed that the court has faced, quote, several forms of threats and hostile intelligence activities intended to interfere with and improperly influence his work. Khan said last month he was seeking arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant for war crimes, as well as so we already talked about that. So the statement of support for the ICC was drafted by 5 member states, Belgium, Chile, Jordan, Senegal, and Slovenia, and was presented to the rest of the court's state parties last week for endorsement. The Guardian cited diplomatic sources, so they summarized kind of just what we just detailed in that last article. The source noted that the statement was also a reaction to other recent hostile activities against the ICC, including a cyber attack last year. The court is going after some very powerful people, not just in the Palestinian investigation, and it's time to send a message that the state parties are there to defend it, the source was quoted as saying. Observers noted that the significance of major Western powers such as Germany, France, Canada, and the UK supported the statement, which called on, quote, all states to ensure full cooperation with the court for it to carry out its important mandate. They also highlighted the large number of endorsing states, 93 out of the ICC's 124 members, and pointed out that previous statements in support of the court had not gained as much backing. Other signatories included Australia, South Africa, Spain, Brazil, and Japan. This is a unique moment of international solidarity, with 93 ICC states parties standing up for global justice and accountability for mass atrocities. So that's a statement from Danya Chaikal, the International Federation for Human Rights' representative to the ICC. So yeah, I mean, that's all the news, kind of what's going on right now with the court. I think it's all very interesting, and I think I want to touch a little bit on, how a lot of my audience are libertarians, although not exclusively libertarians, and I want to touch a little bit on how libertarians should view international law, because, traditionally libertarians and kind of other old rightists, maybe like John Birchers, and they're not the same as libertarians, but view the UN with disgust as, some kind of a globalist entity hinging on global government. And that's valid, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that we should be against international law in the sense that, ideally we would live in a stateless world or stateless society, at least on the microcosm level, because of course I'm not a libertarian universalist. I don't believe that our goal should be setting the world free, as some cosmopolitan libertarians in the Libertarian Party, for instance, might believe, or over at Reason Magazine. I don't think that's the goal. I believe in radical decentralization, but that doesn't mean that we should, liberate the world, because of course that's a slippery slope to military interventionism or, regime change operations, which always, has the point of the sword, something we've talked a lot about. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we should reject out of hand all the concept of states coming together to voluntarily assent to be governed by a set of laws. And of course, I say that with nuance, but we'll take a look at that in just a second. But first, I just want to monologue a little bit about why is it that, I mean, any American who thinks about these issues and thinks critically about these issues should stop to ponder and wonder exactly why are our elected officials going to such lengths to basically block an international criminal court from investigating and charging officially leaders with war crimes that are heavily documented, are publicized. You know, they're all over social media. Um, it, I don't think it's too controversial at this point to say that, like, the world, generally speaking, has recognized non-United States outside the U.S., but it's clear that Israel has lost the propaganda war and has lost the narrative and is losing more and more people the further that this continues in Gaza and the further that they, starve the population, uh, basically intercept any legal efforts to stop what they're doing, and they sabotage those efforts. They continue to spin this narrative web that no one's buying anymore because they can see what's going on the ground with social media and all the activism and stuff like that. The world gets this. I mean, most of the world gets it. And you see these cracks forming with what I just read, that even, some of our lapdog states and some of our close partners, including Japan, which has, I believe, the largest U.S. military presence out of any country in the world. You also see, I'm just trying to find these. So Australia, our very close partner in the war against China, or the coming war against China. Spain, other signatories. The UK supporting the statement in support of the ICC. France supporting the statement. Canada supporting the statement. Germany supporting the statement. Now, that's not to say that those states that I just read off are all in for Palestine, because they're not. But I think it is interesting that these cracks are showing in kind of the Western U.S. aligned world order. And we saw with ICJ too, that we covered on this show as well. I'm trying to see which episode that was so I can direct you for like a deeper dive like this on the ICJ. I think it's vitaldescent.com. Let's see. Sorry about this. It's vitaldescent.com /, 266 is where I unpack the ICJ stuff. So if you want more information on that, but you can see how, South Africa files this genocide petition in the ICJ. I go over what the ICJ is and how that works and how the petition worked. I know there's been some updates on that, and I would like to kind of revisit that in a future episode, but definitely go check that out, /266. And, right, I mean, so not beating this to death, but why wouldn't any American ask themselves, any normal, regular American? Of course, they probably don't hear about this kind of stuff. The world does. Citizens of the world do. People in other countries who are more worldly and informed on, important political events, geopolitics, they know what's going on. Their attention is focused on it. And we don't sit here and wonder why, or even know that our elected officials are being all in to obfuscate this process and to put up roadblocks, and as many as they can, even going so far as to, institute sanctions to threaten the ICC prosecutor Khan with a letter. We looked over that. Republican senators, this will be in the show notes page too. This one here from Dave DeCamp. Republican senators threaten ICC, quote, target Israel and we will target you, with a personal letter. So why is this happening? Why for Israel? And the other part of it too is that when the Biden administration says that they're doing everything that they can within their power, or if they try to make it seem like they're doing what they can to lessen the impact on the people in Gaza, on the innocent civilians who are dying en masse in this this extermination campaign, or this campaign of at least cultural genocide, of crimes against humanity, we can look at it and say, okay, well, if you really want justice, how come you're blocking the ICC's investigation, trying into this, and running, you know, and selectively supporting the ICC when they do something that is beneficial to you, but then, you know, protecting Israel at any lengths, even sacrificing your standing in the world and your international like opinion. So again, all this will be in the show notes page, vitaldescent.com/274. And here I have a law review article. I'll say what it is at the beginning because I don't want to lose my page. I guess it's page 12. So this is Scott James Meyer wrote this article. I'm trying to see, it's the University of Glasgow School of Law, talking about specifically the Austrian School of Economics and Murray Rothbard, Frederick Bastiat, and Ludwig von Mises. Details that in the setup, but then on page 12 he talks about how libertarians in this school of thought should relate to international law. So paragraph C on page 12 of his paper, which I'll link in the show notes page as well, titled The Anarcho-Capitalist in International Law, Obvious Tension with Potential Agreement and Cooperation. Ironically, he says, what are considered disparaging and frustrating problems in international law are what would most attract anarcho-capitalists to its cause. The apparent absence of an enforcement mechanism in international law would be seen as a virtue by anarcho-capitalists. One of the basic tenets of the anarcho-capitalist philosophy is non-coercion in life and law. The lack of a sword is to the anarcho-capitalist a beautiful thing. Though anarcho-libertarian scholars are hesitant to accept the premises and obligations of much of international law, they have found it useful when opposing the domestic policies of their home countries. Congressman Ron Paul was vocal and steadfast that the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq were both immoral and illegal according to international law, as well as critiquing the UN when it provides an impetus for intervention and invasions by such things as the responsibility to protect. One of the most popular topics that generally uninformed Americans complain about is that embracing international law in the UN represents a threat to the national sovereignty of the country. Even if this were to be true, to the anarcho-capitalists, this could be, in fact, a very good thing. If the sovereignty of a nation correlates with the sovereignty of the individual, such as that when the sovereignty of the nation decreases, the sovereignty of the individual increases, then to the extent that international law through treaties, agreements, and other expectations actually increases personal sovereignty by draining power away from the state. This is to be applauded and encouraged. Rothbard described those who were hung up on the international independence of America as, quote, reactionaries and jingoists, emotionally and irrationally devoted to the mystique of American sovereignty. So the age-old, quote, national sovereignty complaint falls by the wayside. Okay, I actually disagree with this. It's an interesting point to make, but I don't agree with this, and I expect that Rothbard had more to say about that. I would have to, let's see, the footnote is from Ron Paul, Fox News. Actually, I don't, okay, so there is a footnote there. The treaty that Wall Street wrote, so that's where where Rothbard wrote about that. I'd like to see the context of that. I don't agree with this for the same reason, though. So he's saying essentially that when nation states have international obligations, sometimes it increases the liberty of, or it decreases the power of the national nation state by giving power to a supranational, like, governing body, which decreases the power of the nation state. But I think what he fails to address here, is the fact that you're really the oh my God, I can't even talk. The supranational body is, I mean, I guess he's defining it as not being like a coercive structure that has the monopoly on violence that the state does. But I think the problem here that he doesn't address is that supernatural, oh my God, I keep trying to say supernatural, the supranational body, like the UN body, it's not accountable. I mean, how is it accountable? It's accountable to the nation states that make it up, right? So essentially, what you're doing as a citizen of a nation state is foregoing your representation in the supranational body, or you're trusting the people who have a monopoly on violence over you to voice your concerns to this international body and not just sign their powers away to unelected oligarchs and officials that make up the shadowy apparatus. So I think that I thought he was going to address this in the section that I read, but I think the thing that libertarians might like about this is that my take on what Murray Rothbard, his understanding and position on international law is that the beautiful part about it is that the nations of the world are actually living in a state of anarchy, in that all these international, like a common law body of international law exists out there because in that anarchy, nation states have come together to voluntarily solve problems, that they've developed a body of law, and that they've had basically judicial structures that will take care of disputes, that will provide dispute resolution and forums for these problems to be taken care of. I thought that was what this person in this article was going to be talking about, but essentially he says, well, the age-old national sovereignty complaint falls by the wayside, like he actually dealt with it. No, I don't think so, because the real complaint here is that when you want the government that's closest to you, and Tom Woods talks about this all the time. Some people are against secession and nullification because, well, what if the state of Georgia or the state of Alabama wants to deprive African Americans of their constitutional rights? Well, we need the feds to come in and to, do a Sherman's March to the sea and destroy the shit out of Georgia because they're depriving certain people of their rights, which is terrible. I mean, both the Sherman's March to the Sea and Georgia depriving civil rights to African American people, both of those things are awful. But again, the government that's closest to you is the one that is easiest to change. So it is much easier to change, as a citizen of Wisconsin in a small town, it's a lot easier for me to change the law at the county level or to change the law at the state level. So for instance, if we want more protection under our Bill of Rights in Wisconsin, it's a lot easier for us to have an amendment to our Wisconsin Constitution that provides more protection than the federal Constitution would. And through that process, you can have more protections and make sure that those protections are being enforced by affecting your local government, which is made up of, a smaller amount of individuals, in which case it is theoretically easier to bring activists together and actually affect change. So I don't like the way that he just disposes of this in this article. And I don't know if he is actually someone who understands. It'd be fascinating to go through this actual article because I see he does quote Lew Rockwell, or at least cites Lew Rockwell and the Mises Institute. So yeah, I don't know who this individual actually is. It'd be interesting to get Scott James Meyer onto a podcast interview, see if he's actually an adherent to, part of this world in the same way that a lot of people that listen to this show are. So, okay, I don't want to overstay my welcome with this. I think this was pretty jam-packed full of information for you guys to chew on. Again, I just want to mention that the Libertarian Institute, we're doing our fundraiser. I'm the Justin Raimondo Fellow over there. We're doing our summer fundraiser, and we're inviting you to join the the fight with us and to help us in our mission of spreading the messages of peace, prosperity, and liberty, and our anti-war activism and editorials that we do over there with all of our great writers. Basically, all this money goes to keeping the staff and keeping the website running. And we're kind of at that point where, in order to keep the lights on, and this is the way it's always been, in the same way that antiwar.com is, we are literally living from fundraiser to fundraiser. So joining that fight with us, becoming a part of it, crucial to keeping that fight going. So libertarianinstitute.org/donate. If you like my work specifically, you can join my membership newsletter, What They're Not Telling You. It's called What They're Not Telling You. It's at vitaldissent.club. So there's vitaldissent.com, which is the podcast host website, and vitaldissent.club. Sign up at vitaldissent.club. You get the free email newsletter. You can also become a supporting member, and you will help me produce the Oppenheimer, Truth About Oppenheimer Part 2 documentary, which I am working on the script on right now. I hope to get it out and done before the end of the summer. And let's see, there's one more thing. Yes, you can get your name read along with all the other supporters, the paid supporters, premium members, and I'm going to read them off right now. Member status is paid, apply. Okay, so Chandler, thanks everyone, all these supporters. Chandler, Andre, Philip, Jesse, Jan, I think it's Jan from Texas, Andreas, G. Cross, Virginia, Jack, Scott, Troy, Nick, Melanie, Ovidiu, or Adrian. Sorry if I'm just butchering your name. Donald, Zygodactyl, Connor Freeman, and Lee. Really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for your support. And again, you can become a premium member, supporting member of Vital Dissent by going to vitaldissent.club, clicking on subscribe in the lower right-hand corner. Right here, you can barely see it on the screen, but click that, then this will pop up. $5 a month or $55 a year. Okay, guys, thanks so much. Really appreciate you.